We also have Councilman Todd Andrews. It's such a pleasure to have all of you here today. I'm Nagi Naganathan, President of Oregon Tech. On behalf of all of us, we are very pleased to host today's town hall and welcome everyone to our Klamath Falls campus. I know you all join me in thanking Congressman Walden for the many, many ways in which he has been supporting Klamath Falls community and our region, whether it's an issue in water or power or forestry. His work in support of Oregon's rural farm and ranch economy has earned him local and national recognition. We appreciate your tireless advocacy, Congressman, for Kingsley Field and our Air Force families, for ensuring that all of the veterans in Klamath County are supported with the services they need and deserve, and for ensuring equity in rural broadband access in our region that keeps us connected to information and the rest of the world. And as Congressman Walden knows well, Klamath Falls and Southern Oregon are engaged communities. We are working hard to improve the lives of our residents, whether it is related to the success of our young people in education, the health and well-being of our residents, or environmental issues. If we do not work in unison and with a sense of shared purpose and interest, we cannot advance very far in addressing any of these. So speaking for the education community, Oregon Tech, as one of Oregon's 7 public universities, is in resonance with his efforts to bring value for all of Southern Oregon. So to this end, last November, the 4 higher education institutions in Southern Oregon, KCC, Oregon Tech, Southern Oregon University, and Rogue Community College, we joined together, we formed a collaboration. It is called Southern Oregon Higher Education Consortium, so we can do more things together and create more opportunities for our region. So we are going to be very intentional and make sure we have a robust workforce right here in Southern Oregon, so our industries don't have to look far to getting capable folks in order to work for them. So Congressman Walden, we know we can count on you for all your support in doing this. So thank you again for coming to our campus. So dear friends, please join me in a loud round of applause for Congressman Walden.
Dr. Naganathan, thank you very much for your kind words of introduction, but also for your terrific leadership for a wonderful, wonderful institution. This is a great place to get an education in a wonderful community that is so supportive not only of education institutions such as this one, but certainly of our veterans and of our active duty military all in one. So thanks for your leadership. I enjoy working with you on the issues affecting Oregon Tech. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you all would stand, we've got the scouts from Troops 71, 40, and 8 who will present our nation's colors and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So, scouts, you're up.
Color guard, attention. Color guard, forward march. Please post the colors. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
2. Color guard, about face. Forward march.
Thank you to our scouts. As an old Eagle Scout, and I emphasize old, it's delightful to see these these young scouts, a couple of them aren't too far away from Eagle, and so that's pretty exciting to see. It's a wonderful program. And it's great to be back on the Oregon Tech campus. I remember when we toured the geothermal facility out here that I think gives you all your power and hot water and probably a surplus along the way, right? Or pretty close to that. It's always great to see the renewable energy work that's being done here, among many other things. And Mr. President, your comments about an educated workforce, a trained workforce, are so spot on. Wherever I go in our district and in hearings we have back in Washington, one of the biggest unmet needs is a capable workforce ready to work. Fortunately, we're living now in a time where we have more jobs than there are people to fill them. But that means the pressure on institutions such as yours and others to produce graduates, fill that vacuum is enormous. I want to also draw your attention. One of the great things I get to do as your elected representative is nominate young men and women to our nation's service academies. And the Klamath Basin did pretty well this time. That these young men and women, they have to go through a pretty rigorous review process. I have a panel of retired or active duty military officers who know what it is to be a leader and what they're looking for. And we had several of them this time I was able to nominate going forward. And I don't think any of them are here today, but they are Brandon Van Meter, son of Stephen and Amy at Klamath Falls. Brandon's been nominated to the U.S. Air Force Academy and the Military Academy at West Point. Nolan Britton, the son of Robert and Robbie Sue of Klamath Falls. He's at Lost River High. He's been nominated to the Air Force Academy. Jacob Healy, the son of Mike and Julie Healy of Klamath Falls. He attends Mazama. He's been nominated to the Naval Academy. And Maximilian Balakis, son of Martin and Kathleen, I think it's Balakis, at Mazama High, has been nominated to the United States Military Academy at West Point. So you can be really proud here in the Klamath Basin. District-wide, you won the prize for most nominees going forward. So, as I say, one of the great privileges and one of the things that give me great faith in the future of our country, when you get to read through their biographies and know that they want to go lead in the military and serve our country and protect our way of life, you know America's in pretty good hands. And so every fall I get to do that and call them, and it's wonderful. They're waiting to hear, by the way, from the academies. The academies themselves actually make the decision. What I thought I'd do this afternoon is give you a brief update on the work we've been doing in Washington over the last couple of years, the last term, and then talk about what's coming forward and reserve the bulk of the time for your comments and questions. You all should have gotten a ticket when you signed in. We're picking up on something the senators do, which it seems to work pretty fairly and evenly, and that is all the tickets go in the Lowe's. We'll turn that around. We can't advertise, but anyway, we narrowly draw them out. So this is my 151st town hall since 2012, and just so you know, we hear from a lot of people in a lot of different ways. We've responded to more than 168,000 emails, letters, phone calls, just in the last 2 years, of which Klamath County has accounted for 9,610. So occasionally we get backlogged, but there are so many ways we hear from people today, including important town halls like this, but also teletown halls. If any of you have been on the telephone town halls, we get a lot of positive feedback on that, because on a day like today, you can be at home around the fireplace and warm and dry and still participate. The other thing we do a lot of work on is casework. And if you're here and need help, I talked to somebody earlier today about help with a veterans matter. Please see one of my staff or contact our office. We're happy to help you in a private setting, get the pay and benefits that you deserve. We worked on a veteran's case, just as an example. A veteran who was experiencing a delay in reinstatement of his compensation, that put him behind in his mortgage payment. They got a hold of us, we intervened, and shortly thereafter, the Treasury issued him a $14,000 check. So don't wait till it gets to that point. We are there to help. Half of all of our casework involves veterans, which is a whole other subject about we need to fix the system so that you don't have to go through your congressman to get what you were promised and deserve. But we are there to help to get things done. So let me start with a couple of issues, and then we'll get into the Q&A here in a few minutes. On the shutdown, many of you may have noticed I broke with my party a bit and voted to reopen the Forest Service and the BLM and these agencies that have no beef and no dog in the fight over border security. And so I think it was important. I don't know what a BLM worker in Vail or a Forest Service worker in John Day or somebody in Fish and Wildlife down here has to do with this debate that's going on in Washington right now. But I also very much support getting border security in place. And I backed the president in the effort to do that. And that didn't used to be a partisan issue. When you go back to 2006 when the Fence Act was passed, Senator Walden voted for it, I voted for it, Peter DeFazio voted for it, then Congresswoman Darlene Hooley from Oregon voted for it, Dianne Feinstein voted for it, and we built over 700 miles of fence and border security. And it works. And I've always felt that a country that doesn't have control of its border does not have control of its security. So we need to get control of our borders, and I support that. But we also need to reform our broken immigration system. And to do that, you have to have control of the inflow and then a processing system that works. And we don't have those last 2 points yet. And so there's more work to be done in Washington on that. We were successful last year in getting authorized and into law $10 million a year for the Klamath Basin and emergency drought relief. That's now in place, and I know 10 million of it came in and has finally been distributed. There were some hiccups over the original language on the first tranche, but going forward now it is authorized so that if we have another rotten water year, this year or next year, whatever, the authorities are clear and in place to provide up to $10 million in disaster relief for farmers in the Klamath Basin. I mentioned Kingsley Field. One of the fun things was bringing both the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee at the time and then the Secretary of the Air Force to the Klamath Basin and show them around. We had meetings with veterans, we had meetings with community leaders, and we spent time at Kingsley. And neither Mac Thornberry nor Heather Wilson, I think prior to me inviting them to come out, had any idea about both the long-term and positive relationship this community has with the Air Force, 75-year lease, the support for our active duty and our veterans, and the enormous fly space out here where you can go practice. And when Colonel Smith put up the slide that showed what Kingsley has to work in and the pilots is as big as the footprint for Nellis. All those guys know about Nellis. They know about Kingsley. It really got their attention. And so I am hopeful that as a result of that visit that we can move forward and have a future flying mission out of here that keeps that base at its full capacity or more. Whether that's F-35s or the F-15Es or other type of training of aircraft, I think we're in a little better position, but it's something we have to really think forward on and get in the queue. And so that's why we brought him out. Heather and I, the Secretary of the Air Force, and I served together in the House. We are friends. And after she did her flight in the F-15, she sent me the selfie she took from the back seat. And there is a grin from ear to ear. She is also a pilot. So I was glad we could bring her out. The community really did a great job impressing her and the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. Let me switch to fires and forests and smoke. I was down here several times last summer and choked along with you, and choked in Medford and even up in Hood River and the Dalles and Central Oregon. And I am not satisfied that we've done enough to take care of our forests to reduce this threat of fire. And so I pushed hard in the last Congress to get more authorities that are proven and work to reduce the fuel loads in our forests on a more timely basis. In the prior Farm Bill, we were able to get these expedited authorities to go into our forests and do the thinning that I think most of us would agree needs to be done. But it was up to the governors of the states to determine which forests would have that authority. And in Oregon, under Governor Kitzhaber, he picked the areas that are in blue. You will note, not much got picked down in here. Not that we have any fires down in here, mind you, right? And so I was pushing to take these tools that are proven, effective, and used in the east side of our district and make them available to every forest. And unfortunately, we got a lot of pushback, and we could not keep that in the negotiations with the Senate. So there we are. So that's something we need to keep working for. We did get some expanded authorities to do some thinning around power lines, a few things like that. Senator Wyden and I were successful, him in the Senate, me in the House, in getting beyond this notion of fire borrowing, where they use the Forest Service funds to do this kind of work to pay to fight fire instead. That's called fire borrowing. It means you don't get the work done, you just pay to fight fire, and you never get ahead. We got that change starting in 2020. They won't be robbing those accounts anymore. So from then on, for the next 8 years, they'll have a separate fund to fight fire. It won't diminish the work that needs to be done here. So that's important. One of the other things I thought was important we should do on federal ground, like we do on private, tribal, and state ground, is after the fire, go in where it makes sense and remove the burned dead trees while they have value, creating jobs and replanting and paying for a new forest, a healthy green new forest for the next generation. We could pass that in the House, we could not get the support we needed in the Senate. So that fell off as well, but remains on my to-do list going forward. Let's look at the slides on fires, on the starts, and there we go. So this is something I heard a lot as I went around the district and went to the fire camps. The state forest fire folks seem to be able to get out the fires faster than what happens on federal ground. I hear that a lot. So we went and did some research. There was an equal number of fire starts on state ground as federal ground. But look at the difference in what burned and what didn't. So the reddish area here, I know it's kind of bright, but the reddish area on the right is all the federal ground that burned. Percent of what burned versus the state Department of Forestry ground that they have firefighting responsibility for. So we obviously got to figure out why that is. So we're going to go to work on that as well. But the result is we lose watershed, habitat, and human health. I did a hearing in the Energy and Commerce Committee, which I chair last fall, again, under the Clean Air Act. And we had testimony that from different universities that between 2,500 and 25,000, that was the range, people die prematurely every year as a result of breathing the smoke from wildfires. Now let's go to the one on carbon if we could. If you're concerned, as I think most of us are, about pollutants in the atmosphere, the 2018 wildfires, according to USGS, were the equivalent of 68 million tons of carbon in the atmosphere, and that's equal to the emissions from a year's worth of electricity produced in California. This is one of the reasons we need to tackle this. And in Oregon, this is the latest data we could find. In Oregon, the 2015 wildfire emissions was the equivalent of the emissions from 3 million cars or 3.5 coal-fired plants. So if you're going to reduce carbon and all that, we should be dealing with our wildfires faster as well and getting our forests back in balance. Last night in Medford, State Representative Pam Marsh held a wildfire summit and had somebody from the Ashland Fire Department say, pre-settlement, fires would come through, as we know, kind of thin things out, and you didn't have this kind of fire season and type we have today. And he said there should be 50 trees, that's what historically there would be, where there are now 175. Oregon State University at our hearing in Washington a year ago said there are stands on the east side that should have 70 trees per acre that have 1,000. So we got too much fuel load out there. So we got to keep working on that. But more of that to come. Let me just hit through a couple of other things. Secure rural schools, we were able to get funding. Klamath County had totaled about $17.8 million in the combined fiscal years FY17 and 18, but that needs to get reauthorized or something needs to happen in that front. Excited about the Swan Lake Pumped Hydro Project that's under consideration and licensing here. This is one of those pump storage projects that would produce enough electricity for 600,000 homes. So as we look at renewable energy and things we can do and value we can build, that sort of thing really makes sense. We changed the hydro licensing laws in America because we think we can generate a lot more clean renewable energy on hydro facilities in line. So you think irrigation ditches that are now in pipes, like in Central Oregon. or existing facilities that don't have hydro on them. And so we streamlined the licensing process for facilities like that that already exist, that you just need to bolt the hydro power on. I would cover two other things. One is opioids. I had roundtables here and elsewhere in the district on this terrible scourge that's killing people in our communities. Our friends, our neighbors, our families. More people will die from a drug overdose than from a car accident in Oregon and in America, and it's been going on every year. And so we tackled that in the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I helped lead the effort to pass, it turned out to be about 63 or 4 different pieces, bipartisan legislation. Almost all of them ended up being unanimous. That looked at what went wrong and how we fix that, how we get to better pain management and treatment, how we get help for those who have this disease, and change everything. And we think this will save lives and be a big step forward in this issue involving drug overdoses. There's more work to be done there, but it made it through the Senate, and President Trump signed it into law. Two other things: we reauthorized community health centers and fully funded them for the next 2 years. That would include like the Klamath Health Partnership. There are 13 of them in our district with 63 sites helping 240,000 people. And we reauthorized the Children's Health Insurance Program, which I think feds pay about 97%. 122,700 kids in Oregon are on CHIP. And so that's where they get their health insurance. We reauthorized that for 10 years. It only never been reauthorized more than 5 before. Oh, here we go. National Health Service Corps to help get docs in rural areas. We did that one. Special diabetes programs to look at prevention, treatment, innovation, and the Indian diabetes programs. There are 2. We did those. We ripped the protective shield off of the hearing aid market. And for those that are in lower level hearing loss, it is now an open and competitive market. And at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas last week, I was not there but read about it, there are now all these new innovators who are getting into this space. And we believe that in that level of hearing loss, there was an opportunity for innovation and more competition. And I knew I was going down the right path when one of the big hearing aid companies decided to attack me and a bunch of other members on the committee. That told me I was doing the right thing. And we passed that into law, and now all these companies, think about Bose headphones, they're getting involved in this now. And I think we can dramatically drive down the cost of hearing aid. Now, if you're in serious hearing loss, that's a different matter. That you still need to go see a professional, but it's sort of the difference between reading glasses, which I started with, to these transitional bifocals, right? You just need reading glasses, you just need the lower level hearing aid. That's now going to be an open competitive market over the counter. We also got rid of the therapy caps limits for Medicare patients who may need physical therapy or other types of therapy. It used to be capped, regardless whether your physician or provider thought you'd had enough. They were just had to stop. We got rid of that as well. So a lot of other things we're doing, but let me stop with that and let's go into the Q&A. What I'm going to do, I'm going to pull 3 numbers. I have no idea who has these numbers. There are no names on them. And we'll have you come up to the microphone. Okay. Is there one on that side? Or? No. All right. I guess we just have one. And so if you'll come up, just say who you are, where you're from. So the first one will be 247. Well, how did I do this? The next is 245, and the next is 249. Go figure. 247, 5, and 9 in that order. Check your numbers. These are not door prizes either. There's no weekend at the Shiloh or something. So you must have one of those. Does anybody have the other 2? Which one do you have? 249. Is 247 or 245? If not, I'll drop.
I have 245, but I'll hold my question until later.
Oh, I don't know if that's going to work. And no 247. All right, come on down and I'm going to mix these up a little better. Greetings, good afternoon.
Yes, thank you for being here and having these meetings, so we'll have a chance to speak out and ask questions of you.
Sure.
I guess one of my questions.
Oh, you tell them your name.
I'm Gary Jackson. I'm a business rep for the International Laborers Union. We represent approximately 2,600 people in the state of Oregon. But one of my questions is about our CTE programs, career technical education in our high schools. We're doing a good job of getting it back into Oregon, but what do we have set up for long-term funding to keep this going past the next few years?
You know, there's been, I think we rewrote some of those programs in the last couple of years. Virginia Fox, who chairs the Education Workforce Committee as a former college president, Dr. Nagy, to try and get these workforce training and education programs back to where they're actually modernized and meeting the needs in the local communities. I don't recall off the top of my head the length of funding on those. I can find out for you, but we recognize in the Congress the need for CTE. We recognize the need for a funding stream behind that, and our workforce is not adequate where we're at, frankly, and I think you know that, just filling slots. I mean, that's a long way from where we were 10 years ago, where there weren't any jobs. Now you got jobs with the rapid change in skill set. What do you run into? What do you think we ought to do in the CTE space? What would work?
Well, I would like to see more pre-apprenticeship programs in these schools. I push the apprentice programs real hard.
Yep.
We're running out of a young workforce, and we need to educate and instill a sense of pride in our work like we used to have.
Yeah.
Something I think we should do is maybe lighten up these regulations on not allowing youngsters to work. I mean, we used to work in the hay fields and
Cherry orchards?
all kinds of things. We're not allowed to do that anymore.
Yeah.
You know, we need to get back and start instilling the work ethics into these kids. But keep pushing the apprentice programs and that type of thing.
Okay. And do you find you have a pretty good partnership with some of the community colleges and some of the other programs around?
Yeah, we do, and we're starting to build that more.
Okay.
But there is, like I say, a terrible gap in the workforce there. We've missed probably 2 generations that just don't know how to work or have the ability to do that.
Yeah. Because there's certainly the need. We're seeing that.
Oh, absolutely.
With the unmet, more job openings than there are people to fill them right now.
Yes.
So, but the skill level is going to be critical to get right.
Yeah.
So we'll look at CTE. I don't think I drew those other 3. I mixed them up.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you. Okay, so the next 3 are going to be 217, 217, 237, and 222. Anybody that has those want to? There's a winner. What's your number?
217.
217. Perfect. Good afternoon. Just tell us who you are and where you're from. What's on your mind?
I'm Jerry Jones. I'm a member of the Woodlock Point Irrigation District.
Okay.
We haven't been getting any water, and in 2005, the state of Oregon gave up its rights to the waters of the Klamath, and I don't think the federal government's ever gave it back. Never been able to find a letter releasing it. In 2006, an act of Congress removed 700,000 acres from the reservation. And in 1985, there was a Supreme Court ruling where the tribes brought a suit against the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for hunting and fishing rights on the whole former reservation, and they lost that suit. And the Supreme Court ruling said that their time immemorial rights will be on the current reservation boundaries. So there's 700,000 acres in the upper basin that's not in the reservation, and we're not getting our water. We're being abused by the Oregon Water Resources Department. And, so that's a major problem. We've asked for drought relief And there's no drought relief for people that have had to cut back their herds or eliminate them. And, the other thing I wanted to bring up is in the Forest Service contracts,
Yeah.
almost all of them are stewardship contracts.
Mhm.
100% of that money goes back to the Forest Service. The cities, the
Counties
county
don't get any of
government,
it.
the schools, they don't get any of that money. So we're getting robbed at 25% of the general
Yeah.
revenue.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I definitely hear that from the county folks that are here, and all across the district. The stewardship program was not set up to replace all other activities on the forest, and at times it feels like that. It was a goods for services concept to do more work in the woods, not replace the timber harvest program at all. It seems to me we've gone more and more down that path, which means the local governments are not getting the revenue they used to get, which is why we've had to replace it with SRS money, which also now has run out, and we're going to have to find a new funding mechanism or some other idea to deal with this. You know, there was a day and time when we managed the forests and they produced revenue and jobs and, you know, lower fuel loads out in the forests. And so I always say, can't we go back to better management and stewardship? Now, you're not going to go clear back to the harvest levels of the 70s or whatever, but we've come so far away from that. There's got to be a happier medium here, and that would produce revenues. There are discussions underway about, can you modify the stewardship contracting process so that the local governments would benefit from that as well? But that also means those projects have to make enough revenue that there's anything to spin off. And oftentimes I hear you can get agreement as long as you don't do any merchantable timber of any size, right? And so that's not going to generate revenue. So we got to get back in balance here. We do it on state lands, we do it on private and tribal lands. There are better ways to manage these forests than what we're seeing now. And I made some notes on your water issues. We'll follow up. What number are you, sir? 222. Please go ahead. Tell me your name. And
my name is Michael Fitzgerald. I've been in Klamath Falls, Klamath area since 1981.
Okay.
Great to see you here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to be back. We're trying to add to the snowpack. We brought it from up on. No, I'm not claiming credit for snowpack.
My concern is that the political process is largely unresponsive to the will of the people. Many consider the political process corrupted by the influence of big money. The economic system that we labor under at present is not capitalism. It's a system that has intentionally been constructed by politicians, put into office by a corrupt political process whose mission is to concentrate wealth and power into the hands of a few. It serves the few and exploits the people. It has disenfranchised large sectors of the populace. The popularity of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump can be easily linked to the people's feelings that the government does not represent them, but instead a select group of special interests.
Mm-hmm.
Since the early 1970s, reference the Powell Memo, the money elite has been concentrating their power in government by controlling the political process using campaign contributions. That concentration of power has enabled them to obviate the invisible hand of the free market capitalism and structure the economic system so as to serve the few and exploit the many. Concepts of private property, constraints of monopoly, contracts, bankruptcy, or other means of coping with default and enforcement of such rules, the essential building blocks of any market have been manipulated to serve the powerful. To make the political process democratic and a government of the people, money must not be the primary motivating force. To that effect, the Supreme Court of the United States decision in Citizens versus FEC must be overturned. Only when the elected are truly serving the people and not their big money campaign contributors will the people again have faith in the government. Only then will our democratic republic be effective and capably provide for the needs of the people. We must break the stranglehold that the power elite have on the free market and return us to an economic system that serves the people and not just a few. Do you recognize and intend to remedy this calculated formula for inequity?
Well, I don't know that I agree with everything you've had on that sheet. But look, we need a couple of things. We don't need other governments, Russia, involved in our elections or the way we conduct our public processes. Period. We need to be able to have faith in our electoral process and our votes. That when they're cast by people who are legally allowed to vote in America, and that we can trust that piece, because voting integrity is really important. We don't need to engage in voter suppression, but anybody that's legally able to vote should be able to. And in the area of campaign and contributions, it has gotten murky in many respects. But from the federal campaign side, since Teddy Roosevelt, I think, was president, corporations cannot contribute to federal campaigns. That's been prohibited. PACs, which were a creation and a revision out of the Watergate era to reform the system, were allowed to contribute $5,000 in the primary and $5,000 in the general, and that has never been indexed for inflation, so it's the same number today as it was in '74 or so. Individuals are limited on the amount they can contribute to an individual's campaign. That's under federal law, and that's $2,700 in primary and $2,700 in the general. I think the revolution that has come, and you referenced Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, and I agree with you on this point. I think they were speaking to the same voters who felt left behind all across America. And they had different views of what to do and where to go. But they were talking about people who felt their jobs had been taken away through bad trade agreements, and that they were just powerless. And that's who rose up in the 2016 election and gave Bernie Sanders such oomph, and frankly put Donald Trump over the top. And so I think the great thing about America is, and with the internet now, people can really make a difference, and they did. Well, I won't get into it. I was going to say, I'm not a Democrat, but I think the superdelegate process that the Democratic Party has made it easier for Hillary to win and win and win, and harder for Bernie to, and I think some of what came out showed there was a little bias there. I'd be upset if I were a Bernie Sanders supporter. And so, again, I think that the great thing about America is, though, you just saw it play out in this election. People said, nope, I want a little check and balance here. And they rose up and changed things in Washington. And they'll probably do it again. But, you know, overall, we have a constitution that provides for free speech. And that's what the Supreme Court said was at work here, is the free speech rights of Americans to contribute with their money and participate in the political process.
Buckley versus Vallejo in 1972 said that money was speech. Citizens of the United States corporations had personhood, therefore they could spend almost unlimited amounts of money through super PACs, another way. So I do not have the same level of speech as someone who had more money with me.
True.
That is not a democracy.
Michael Bloomberg spent $100 and some million almost exclusively on congressional races for Democrats. Literally, you think about that, over 100 million into the races, 2 to 3 to 4 million per race, had an enormous impact. There are those on the right. I didn't see him show up and do that, by the way, but that's another. but this is going on. Both sides do this. And sometimes as a candidate, you feel like a bit player in a much bigger play because the outside groups come in and wage this war. But it is part of our free speech rights as companies, as unions, as others to participate.
Thank you.
The interesting thing is Donald Trump, I'm told, is the biggest online small donor fundraiser in history. So when you think about how grassroots do get involved, Bernie was enormously powerful in online small donor fundraising too. So there are lots of elements here that never used to be there. Let's see, where are we? 2037. Nope. 2037. Okay, I'll draw a couple more here. 230. I'm sorry, 237. Did somebody have 237? This is 230. Ah, look at you.
Hello, I'm Rob Unruh.
Good to see you.
Here.
Yep.
Yeah. Farmed all my life here. I appreciate being here, and I'll give you some credit for increasing the snowpack. It's pretty good.
Yeah, but then I gotta take the blame for a drought, so I don't stay out of that.
You know, I saw the funding for last year been completely involved in that. We're at 70% snowpack, 70% precip yesterday. there's questions about getting that money here again next year. I really feel that probably the difference in that money this year was we probably only lost 1 or 2% of farmers in the basin instead of 10 or 15.
Yeah.
I drove down the road. It's been going through my mind a lot. We keep losing names of farmers that have been here longer than I have. I mean, I drive down my road, there's one farmer where there used to be, every house was a farmer. I chased water this year down into California, new country for me, for farming. I took a piece of equipment across for about 10 miles. You go by and there'd be an old piece of farm equipment there, but that was all that was left. It's not a farmer anymore, it's somebody else. Row crops been devastated in the basin. The trickle down of the economic impact of that's incredible. I looked up last night, we've been dealing with the suckers listed in 1988, the coho in 1997. I think the farmers and the economy in the basin are declining at about the same pace as a species. And yet, here we are opposed to continue to do the exact same thing. I don't, you know the definition of that?
Insanity.
Yeah.
Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
So I look for your help. I appreciate your help. The stuff in the Klamath legislation is huge for us. The money is huge for us. But we got to look at something different, some change in this. Economically, if you're a businessman, what we're doing is one of the worst business plans you could ever look at. And I'm not going to go into it, but you understand.
Your banker's not here, is he or she?
Yeah, no, he's not.
Okay.
But we
No, I know.
We need your continued help,
You got
and
it.
we need a fix to this problem.
Yeah, you got it. And I don't have to tell you, I don't think there's an issue I've worked on in my time in public service that's been more vexing and more elusive to find a way through. And we've tackled some tough stuff over the years. There are so many legal issues, treaty issues, political issues that I don't have to tell you, I mean, how hard it's been. But I'm always an optimist, and I think there's got to be a way through this. And I talk a lot with Alan Mickelson, Secretary Zinke when he was there. We spent time in his office going through the Klamath Basin. It's why I think they're as dedicated as they've been to trying to find a solution. I know there are puts and takes about Alan's views and things, but as there are on other issues. But at least you got their attention. And they're going through a change now in the Department of Interior, obviously at secretarial level. But you got to have them engaged, and we've got to have all parties, and I stand ready to try. I mean, I tried a path, and that didn't go over so well, to see if we could break through at least legislation in the House and move forward, and that didn't work, but I'm fully committed. There's nothing I would like better than to find a solution, and I'm open, my door is always open. I'm open to working with anybody if we can work through it. But you got two states, you got power companies, you know, I mean, and the tragedy is this is such a fertile basin that had such promise to bring people here, was the gift of water and cheap power forever. And then the rules kept changing, the laws kept changing. And so I still believe there's a way through this. So we're ready to double down in this cycle and go after it again. And as I say, I'm open to hearing from and working with anybody that wants to come to the table and do that. But it's got to be something you can actually pass in the House and the Senate, and it can't be blank check, because we have to figure out how to fund it. And I think and it has to be something the administration is for. But I think the administration, I am confident if we could come together, House, Senate, us, tribes, everybody with a plan, we could probably convince the administration to back it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, survey number 240. Were you 242? 230. 242. 216. 216, we have a winner. Come on down. Were you one of the other ones? 242, perfect.
So first, I want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I wouldn't want your job.
Tell me your name and where you're from.
I'm Leslie Lowe. I first moved to this basin back in 1973.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm an old bird.
No.
Just like you.
Yeah. Well, there was that last week. So I think that Medicare thing's really important.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet. It's quiet over there.
Well, I appreciate all that you have shared with us today, and that's been extremely informative, and I appreciate your coming here to do a town hall.
Sure.
We've had problems getting you here and getting the opportunity to speak with you. And so what I would really like to do is let you know that you rarely represent my views, especially regarding immigration, Jordan Cove, liquid natural gas pipeline, environmental issues, and especially President Trump's behaviors. And my hope is that you are open to changing the way you vote so that voters, not corporations, are better represented. I really appreciate what Mike Fitzgerald shared with you. I think he was spot on in terms of the ways in which this country needs to change so that voters are better represented. We in Oregon are extremely fortunate with our motor voter and ability to just mail in our ballots. Unfortunately, that's not true across the country. But I would like to know what you are willing to do to change the way you vote so that voters, not just money, in our district are better represented.
Before we get there, and I'm happy to go there, tell me what you think should happen on immigration, where we differ.
Well, that's a very complicated subject, and I'm sure we don't have time for all of that. But very, very simply, we are a sanctuary state. That came across that voters supported that in the last election. I would appreciate my views being respected.
Let's be respectful.
I would like to remind everybody who's in this room that unless you are a Native American, you came from someplace else.
I actually just said that in the town hall in Jackson County a little while ago.
I am concerned that we are treating immigration families in a way that is incredibly disrespectful and harmful. I'm aware that Senator Merkley has gone to a number of the camps down on the border. I listen to PBS News, and it's very clear that many of the border towns do not want a wall. And to hold up 800,000 family checks and all of the people that are affected as a result of that being held up. And I know that the House of Representatives and the Senate are willing to move forward on this, but I don't know what you as a Republican can do with our president to keep him from holding those people hostage.
Yeah, so let me take that, and I appreciate it. This is a good dialogue to have, because literally, actually it was Grants Pass I said, unless you're Native American, we're all immigrants, and we should embrace immigration, legal immigration. And we always have. The problem is, we may differ here. I don't support open borders, and I'm not saying you necessarily do, but I do support border security. It doesn't mean it's a wall the whole way, because there's technology that makes more sense in some areas. There's fencing that makes sense. I mean, there are different ways. My goal is how do you get border security so we can have a legal flow and decision-making process as opposed to people coming across the Rio Grande, paying smugglers to get them through. You've got child trafficking going on. You've got a lot of bad things. I too went to the border. I led a bipartisan congressional delegation to McAllen. We went to the same place Senator Merkley went, both of those places, and to, I think it's American Bridge. There were 4 places we went. And because I did not support child separation, I didn't think that was a good policy, and I'm the only member of the delegation that actually voted to change the law to prevent child separation. That was in June. And it also is when we dealt with DACA, agricultural workers, and $25 billion for the wall. It did not pass in the House. So far this year, I voted to reopen many of these agencies, Forest Service, I said, Interior, and many of the people you referenced, if we're going to have a fight over border funding, it's unfortunate we're having it, but we are, that should be on the Homeland Security bill, because that's the appropriation bill where border security gets funded. As I said in the outset here, I don't know what a BLM worker in Vail or a Forest Service worker in John Day has to do with this fight, other than they're now a month behind in their work, and their families are struggling to figure out how to pay bills and all. We tried, by the way, on the House floor yesterday. We had a vote to pay them through this pay period, and it was voted down on partisan lines. You didn't have to reopen the government, at least pay them now. You're going to pay them later. We already signed that into law. So why not issue the checks now? At least pay them. And that was voted down by the Democrats in the House. So you don't read a lot about that stuff, but it does happen. And we said, well, we could agree to do that. And the president would have signed that bill, and it was defeated in the House. So when it comes to the other issues you raised, we just had an election. The next one will be in 655 days. Everything was on display, and as you know, I had a very active opponent out there, and voters in this district made the choice. Mm-hmm. And the voters in this district also elected Donald Trump in 19 of 20 counties by a 20-point margin. And so my goal is, whether it was Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, George Bush, Donald Trump, I think I've tried to be as effective as I can in working with whoever's in the White House to the benefit of our district and our state. And when I disagree, I try to do it directly or with the intermediaries, either with my voice or with my vote. Yesterday, I was one of 130 Republicans that voted not to lift the sanctions on the Russian oligarch. The administration thought it was time to. They made a case. I didn't think it was compelling. I don't really like Russian oligarchs. I don't trust Russian oligarchs. And I voted the other way, even though the Department of Treasury thought we should lift them. And so I try with my voice and my vote to do what I think is best for the people of the district and the state. And then, of course, they get to vote every 2 years.
And I thank you for that service. I just don't agree with you on some of the things that you do.
Yeah, that's right.
And I truly do feel, because I get a lot of those emails that you send out, I truly do feel that many times those of us who are in the minority in this district don't really get heard. So I'm also president of our local Klamath County League of Women Voters. We have a request into your office to answer 4 questions, and I'm looking forward to your answers.
When did you send that?
It just got sent a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
And I know the session just started and you're busy and all of that.
Well, the inflow is pretty amazing. We have less staff now than probably when I was elected. We answered 168,000 requests like that, letters, emails, phones. So we will get to it, but bear with me, because I actually review all the letters and edit. I'm an old journalist, so I do editing, drive staff crazy, but they do the research, I do the editing on everything that goes out. And so we will look for that. Riley, maybe you can get her direct contact information, and we'll try and pull that to the front of the list. And thanks for being here. 251. Oh wait, you were next, right?
242.
Yeah, 242, and then 251. Hi.
My name is Sherry Keys. I lived in Southern Oregon in your district since 2001.
Excellent. So you're here in the Klamath Basin?
I am now. I'm in Klamath Falls. I came prepared to ask you a question, and then I changed my mind about it. So I hope that my numbers at least capture the general truth. To me, as a human, a mother, a person who cares about the planet and the people on it, I believe that the moral question of our time is to alleviate, mitigate, and do whatever we can to stop the impacts of climate change. As I was researching this earlier, and again, these numbers aren't exact because it's going off my memory.
Sure.
Sorry. According to the League of Conservation Voters, you only voted 9% of the time with it's on bills to, mitigate the effects of climate change, to reduce emissions. And then if you look at those votes as critical votes, where they were close, it was only about 3%. I would like to know how you look at this issue, and if you would ever be willing to sponsor meaningful legislation to curb emissions and lessen the impact of climate change.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for raising that issue, because I know it's an important one. And actually, as the ranking Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee now, I was chairman. Now I'm the top Republican because the change controlled the House. I've been having meetings with my side to talk about what can we do in terms of climate change and how do we mitigate, how do we reduce carbon emissions, methane emissions, all of that. But my view is we should do it through innovation, not taxation, through adaptation and conservation, not necessarily more regulation, and that has worked. Part of the reason that America has reduced its carbon emissions to 1992 levels now is because the switch in power from coal generation to natural gas. And I think we've got a slide up there. I don't know if you can see that. In Oregon right now, about 32% of our electricity comes from coal generation. Natural gas is 17, hydro is 40, wind is 7, and then everything else over here, I know in the Klamath Basin it may be better than this, Dr. Doggy, but 0.27 is solar and geothermal, is that 0.12? 0.12, biomass 0.38. But the result of this nationwide is we are back to 1992 levels, 13% below 2005 levels. And principally it's that fuel switching. And a lot of that had to do with the finding of natural gas through things like some of you I know don't like, which is fracking. But it has resulted in the production of natural gas where we thought we had none. And the result is natural gas prices became cheaper to produce energy than coal. And so we've taken 16 gigawatts of coal power offline and gone to natural gas. And as you can see, to make up just in Oregon what we would need for coal and natural gas, you'd have to dramatically change the power mix. And I know in eastern Oregon, if you've driven out across the wheat fields there, it's one windmill after another, all across the east side. I think we've got 8,000 or 9,000 megawatts of wind energy. We're blessed with great hydro power. And as I mentioned earlier, we passed legislation that would allow us to put more hydropower in place in existing facilities, irrigation pipes, existing dams. So I would argue that the more we can shift to hydro, the better. Oh, and the Swan Lake issue too, 600,000 homes would be powered on pump storage. So you'd have renewable energy. When you don't need that, that's running the pump. It pumps the water back up into the lake, and then it comes back through as hydro and produces power. So there are some innovative approaches there. And then I've supported legislation that's been passed to look at how we modernize the electric grid so that we can handle these new renewable energy resources as they come online. You have to have an electric grid that can manage all that. And so I think there are also investments we should be doing in battery technology. And I've toured our national labs, a couple of them, in Idaho and in Pasco, Washington, where we're employing scientists to figure out how to do grid-sized battery storage. Because then that means when you have intermittent renewable energy sources, such as solar, not going to make much at night, and wind, when it blows or doesn't blow or you need it or not, you can run that into battery storage. That then can flow back when you need it. Right now you have to do probably combined cycle natural gas to even out the power curve. So there are things we're doing through innovation and discovery that are making a big difference. If you look at the countries that are part of the Paris Accords, I think none of them has gotten more than 80% of the goals they set, and only 5 are above 50%. They're trying some different approaches, and I know there are probably some in the audience that would support a carbon tax, I've heard that, and other techniques to try and force a change. But I'd rather go the other way because it's worked here, and other countries tried other approaches. where we can reduce emissions by being smarter in the energy we use and through innovation. Now, League of Conservation Voters doesn't count that in their scorecard, by the way. They probably didn't count our hydro bills, a few things. That's one of the problems with those types of scorecards. But I think our body of work's pretty good about renewable energy. I've certainly supported it here in the Renewable Energy Center when we could do earmarks and get support for this university. And the people that are getting educated here, the geothermal effort here on the campus and elsewhere. I think it's actually an exciting time in the world of energy and what's coming. And I think America can and should lead, and that will reduce emissions.
Yeah, it was my understanding in the last year emissions actually did go up.
They did in the last year, yes. And principally that's because of economic growth, and a lot of it was in manufacturing. It was not necessarily in the energy sector. It was in transportation and manufacturing because our economy grew dramatically. But on a per capita basis, I believe we were still below anybody else in the world in terms of the economy per capita and emissions. So we have more work to do. But
Yeah, since I was a little nervous as I was really asking my question. Yeah, I feel like this is an extremely urgent, and I'm glad to see that you supported some things, but I feel like it needs to be treated like it's just like, I mean, this is a state of emergency for our world, and I hate to see, I don't know why we're relying on fossil fuels that are, why we aren't doing more for solar and wind.
yeah, and so there's a lot more solar and wind coming, but as you could see from the chart on just Oregon's energy, and you know how progressive we are in Oregon on renewables, and that's as far as we've gotten, is right there. Nuclear is another thing. Now I know a lot of people don't like nuclear energy, but if you're talking about how do you get baseload power with no carbon emissions, there is a company in Oregon that's going through a licensing process to do small-scale nuclear electricity generation with new technology. It's being reviewed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for possible site licensing. And there are companies looking at that now burn coal in Utah that are looking at this new scale, it's called, new scale, a modular nuclear reactor, a whole new design technology. It's part of why I also led the effort in the House. We passed a bill to finally get permanent storage of nuclear waste in a safe location, Yucca Mountain. Been to Yucca Mountain, passed 340 votes out of 435 in the House, big bipartisan vote. So we don't have nuclear waste stored in 120 sites in 38 states or whatever it is. We could have it safely secured. But nuclear power can hold some promise here as well.
Thank you.
And wildfires we shouldn't forget that. If you go back to the carbon emissions from these wildfires, it's equal to what burned in California last year. Not all that's forest, by the way, we know that. But just those emissions, 68 million tons of carbon, a year's worth of electricity.
And Greg, we have time for a couple more.
Okay, 251. Now survey number 251. Whoops. 210. Oh, wait, I must have read that wrong. Should we vote? Mr. Kevin.
Hi, Mr. Walden. Thanks for coming.
Good to be here.
By the way, my son Jackson is studying nuclear engineering at Oregon State, and he's working at NuScale to work on his master's degree right now.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah.
It's really pretty cool technology if they can make it all work the way they do.
It's fascinating. And I appreciate the previous comments, but I would disagree and say that the number one thing that is facing our world right now is the gap of our ability to feed the planet and the food demand that we're going to be seeing in the year 2050. And we got to wake up and deal with that as the most critical issue facing our generation, I believe. So I just wanted to I'm going to put a plug in for it. It's your lucky day. I wanted to thank you.
Good, because I thought you were going to sing or something.
I want to thank you for the provisions in the Water Resource Development Act, which is called the America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. Those Klamath provisions, we were very involved at Family Farm Alliance, who I work for, trying to get more reclamation related provisions in that bill. They didn't make it, but the Klamath provisions did. I think they may have been the only reclamation provisions in the country that were included. Some reason why that happened.
We may have leaned in pretty hard on that.
Yeah, so I got a huge appreciation for that, so thank you. Which brings up the issue of these other things that we were pushing for in water infrastructure, including things like title transfers and aquifer recovery and streamlined storage provisions, those sort of things. One of the few things I see that might have bipartisan support for in this Congress is infrastructure. Could you talk about the vehicles and the chances of success we might see for an infrastructure package?
Yeah, and before I do that, on the title transfer issue, Dan Newhouse, my colleague from Washington State, has a bill to do one in his district. We were talking about the other morning, but thinks there could be broader implications for other districts that may want to take title to the resource after they've paid it off. And that's something I'd love to chat with you about. Dan, you all wouldn't necessarily know him, he's former state ag director in Washington State, now a member of Congress on the Appropriation and Rules Committee, and really a good head on these matters. On infrastructure, hey, the happiest guy in the Oregon delegation is Peter DeFazio, because he's waited 33 years to become chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and he finally gets to do that. I'd say the other happy guy in Washington is probably the president. I was in a meeting in the cabinet room with DeFazio and me and his Republican counterpart, my Democrat counterpart, a bunch of others, and they were talking about infrastructure investment. This was last year, mid last year, and the president's all in about doing infrastructure. Mike Pence will tell you Americans elected a builder. That's what he likes to do, is build things. And he was talking about infrastructure for an hour. And DeFazio was practically dancing on the table, and so was his Republican counterpart. So I think you're going to see a bipartisan effort. The question will be, what are people willing to pay to get the infrastructure? You know, the federal gas tax hasn't gone up in, I don't know, a couple of decades probably. But we know costs have, and yet vehicle efficiencies have gone up. And electric vehicles, I drive a hybrid, as you've accused me of, a couple of times. Gets better mileage. And so that we're going to figure out how you have a highway trust fund that is capable of funding the infrastructure we know we need. The last time we did a major transportation bill, we were fortunate in Oregon to be one of the recipients of one of the super funding grants. If you recall, if you drove I-5 or I-84, all those overpasses had to be replaced, all those bridges, because they were a poor-in-place construction design that, as it turns out 50 years later, was flawed, and they were all cracking at the same time. So they all had to be replaced, and it was a couple $2 billion, I think, we got into the state. And the good news for us, even though Peter and I are a different party, we are friends and work together, if he's chairman of the Transportation Committee, we will not be left behind in whatever comes out. And so I'm open to that. We did a couple of things that I would label as infrastructure because they're important to communities. We modernized and reauthorized and funded the Brownfields program. If you haven't been to Bend, see the old Mill District, that was a Brownfield site. The Houston Astrodome, built on an old brownfield site. You get a 16-to-1 rate of return for every dollar of your federal taxes invested through the Brownfields program. So we did that, signed into law. We did the same thing with Safe Drinking Water Act. If you think about lead in the pipes in Michigan, and then we discovered, by the way, it's a problem everywhere. We modernized and funded the Safe Drinking Water Act, so that sets up the revolving loans that come to states and local communities. We added a provision in there for drinking fountains in schools, for example. So that we know when a mom gives a glass of water to a kid that it's going to be safe. And so that I would look at as infrastructure, and then some siting efficiencies as well, and then these hydro licensing expedited authorities in existing facilities too. So there's a lot on the infrastructure that's more than just highways and bridges, but boy, we need to work on highways and bridges too.
I would add watershed health is infrastructure too.
Yeah, it is. It is because, without water, as you all know, it's a heck of a problem. And we know that trees are pumps, and we know when they burn, they produce carbon and every other bad pollutant, and they suck up water. I mean, it was Chuck Graham and Steve Ellis, who were the Forest Service and BLM heads in Lakeview, that I think it was Chuck Graham Forester said that first, trees are pumps. And when you have overstocked stands where you have 1,000 trees when there should be 70, is it no wonder the trees are under distress and springs dry up. We have cases where we remove juniper and or thin the forest, and springs return and actually intermittent streams return. So good stewardship means thinking about all this. So yeah, I think we got time for, what, one more? Oh, I have two more up here. 231, 231, and 213, 213. 213 or 231? All right, we'll go for one more. One more. 229. Wow, a lot of door prizes going on. Oh, there he is. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Art Knight. I live here in Klamath Falls.
Hi, Art.
I'll try to be short here. I just make one suggestion on some of your town halls, that if it was faster for every question, more people could have time to ask questions.
So in other words, I'm talking too long?
You said it politely. No, I appreciate that.
I take it.
Okay.
Yep.
And thank you for coming across the snow. I was supposed to be in Portland and I chickened out. So, but anyway, I wanted to know your opinion, your interpretation of the travel ban that the executive branch has put on the Congress, not allowing trips, and I haven't got all the things, but not allowing military transport, not allowing commercial transport, and should this also be something that should be imposed on the judicial and the executive branch, that they shouldn't be able to do that? And how do you feel about that violating the separation of powers? And then how you got here today and how that affects you in your travels.
Okay. So what you're referring to is the president's decision not to let Speaker Pelosi and a delegation of members of Congress go to Davos and then Brussels and then Egypt and then Afghanistan, which was the trip.
Right, but it's also been banned for anything else in Congress, right?
I don't know that. I do not know that.
It's kind of recent, yes.
Yeah, and I fly commercial, so I flew out on United through Denver and into the Rogue Valley International Airport, Medford International Airport. And we drove over here by rental car because that's cheaper than paying some individual mileage to do that. And so that's how I go back and forth. The types of trips that the speaker was planning are on a military aircraft and are paid for by the State Department, generally. So it comes out of the State Department budget, and it is military Air Force aircraft or Guard Reserve. There's different aircraft in that fleet. And you do have to get permission, if you go on one of those trips, whoever's leading it, from the executive branch to both use the military personnel and the military aircraft. They make that decision because it's coming out of the State Department budget and out of military. So that is how it's always been.
How does the executive, the president, does he apply to himself to be able to fly? I mean, he's going to show up in Iran unannounced. These things are done.
I don't know if he's been in Iran.
Where? He's been in, I'm sorry, how about Iraq?
Iraq, yeah. So remember, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military under the Constitution. So yeah, he does have that authority. Yeah. So, and I'll try and keep this brief. The president does not have the authority to ban Congress from flying commercial. Period. Hard stop. And none of us would tolerate that, nor should we. When it comes to military aircraft funded by the State Department, he does have that authority. I've led some of those trips over time, and you always have to work with the administration, and the Pentagon has to sign off on it, that there's a military purpose to the trip, and the State Department has to sign off on it, that there's a diplomatic purpose to the trip. And so you have to get their permission in order to qualify in Congress to use that resource.
And does the executive have to do that? Also?
President is the commander-in-chief.
He can just do it.
He did, however, cancel his own delegation going to Davos, as he canceled Ms. Pelosi's delegation going to, I believe she was going to Davos on the way to Brussels, and then from Brussels to Egypt, and Egypt to in and out of Afghanistan. And so, yeah. So I think he canceled his own delegation. Look, here's the bottom line. I wish they'd all stay in Washington and work this thing out. Fish and Wildlife people back, I understand, on furlough to do this work. You look at the work that should be done in the Ashland watershed to control burns, probably not today, but they were doing it, but they had to stop because there's no Forest Service person there to oversee it. I get calls from people in timber sales that say they're about to have to shut down their timber sale because you don't have a Forest Service person there to do whatever they have to do their thing. In the private sector, I had farmers that were not able to get their loans in Sherman County and Gillum County. Now, the Secretary of Agriculture brought back federal employees in the FSA to work that out across the country, but those people aren't getting paid. And so I wish they would all get in a room and you know, not have people off to Puerto Rico and people off to wherever, and I don't care who it is, but they all ought to sit down and work this out for the betterment of the country. And we ought to get border security too. There's a deal to be had here if people will just work their way through it. It's not like trying to solve the water problem in the Klamath Basin, I'm just going to tell you. So yeah, he does have that authority. Does that have that authority? Yep. Well, there we go. Thank you all for coming out on this snowy day. We appreciate it. And just remember, whatever differences we have, we still live in the best country on the planet. God bless America. Thank you.